Cool. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this classic glider example. We'll kind of do this by hand so we can kind of get a feel for the technicalities that live in the rules of this game. And then we'll jump into some code so we can nicely see these animations come to life and then really begin poking at some of the interesting underlying questions. So we saw this cool little glider back in that original cartoon, that nice little tribute to Conway, where we had this glider nicely kind of drifting off to the top right. So I'm going to poke back into this glider because it's a really nice example to see this birth-death process come to life. There's enough births and deaths that are going to go on in each generation that we can really start to see all of the rules emerge. Other ones just have, persistence, so there's not enough births happening, so you don't get kind of a good feel for what's happening, but the glider does a really nice job of that. So over on the left, I'm going to have the initial version of it, and I'm going to call this thing Gen 0. So it's kind of drawn up in this top left corner. The way that this glider is going to be positioned, that this one is actually going to fly to the bottom right. So at each couple generations, you're going to see that this thing is going to click over one and down one, and it's going to nicely drift on downward. In these next couple of slides, I'm going to run the exact same process over and over and over. So I'm going to take that original state. So I'm going to have that Gen I. I'm going to copy and paste it in the middle. And then I'm going to spam this with a whole bunch of numbers. The numbers are going to be in 2 different colors. The purple are going to then talk about what's happening if I'm in the current dead state, as well as the mac and cheese colored ones are then going to say these things are currently in the alive state, because we have different rules depending on which state I was going to be in. If I'm alive and I see a 2 or a 3, I stay alive, and everything else I'm going to go off and die. And if I'm in the dead state, I only have to go looking for 3s. If I have a 3, I then pop up and I become alive, and life is great. And in all of the ones, I stay dead. So that's basically what I'm looking for, is I'm looking for 2s, 3s, and other 3s. So 2s and 3s that are mac and cheese are going to stay alive, and purple 3s are then going to become alive. Everything else then is going to be dead at the end of the day. So you can see that emerging here. So if I look through those purple letters, or purple numbers, I should say, I'm going to have, whoa, zoom in when I touch my hand on my iPad. So if I touch this ever so delicately, I have a 3 here and I have a 3 there. So those are going to become my 2 states that switch from being dead to becoming alive. So I'm going to have a purple thing there and a purple thing there. If I look at the 5 states that are currently alive, 2 of them are going to die off. This one and this one, because they are both singleton 1s, so they die due to loneliness, whereas the other 3 are all going to be in that perfect kind of sweet spot. They have just enough neighbors to be happy, but they're not overcrowded. So they're the 2 or the 3, so they're going to stay alive, which then creates that. So that's the process of going from Gen 0 over to Gen 1. Well, then we're going to take that Gen 1 and move it on downward, change it all into black because we're going to kind of click that into place, change the middle thing into that new Gen 1, spam it with a whole bunch of purple numbers, keeping track of what's happening in the dead states, and then draw a whole bunch of these mac and cheese orange ones to talk about what's happening in the alive states, and then basically go around looking for 2s and 3s. The kicker, though, is that I don't want to bring a 2 that is dead to become alive. So I'm looking for purple 3s. So I want to see that purple 3 and that purple 3, which is then going to give me that alive state and that alive state. And then I'm looking for mac and cheese, orange 2 and 3s. Here you can see that this top left 1 is then going to die due to loneliness, and that middle 4 is actually going to die due to overcrowding. The other 2, 3, and 2 are going to be where those things come from because they're in that sweet spot. Not too crowded, not too lonely, maintain my current course of action. Sweet. All right. Gen 2 to Gen 3 then is rinse and repeat. The whole game, same game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that Gen 2, lock it into the black mode, slide it over to the middle, spam it with a whole bunch of purple and mac and cheese orange numbers, go looking for purple 3s, which I can find there and there, which become that and that. Find the 2s and the 3s in the orange, which are those, which are going to create that thing, and then kill off the 1s because those are going to die due to loneliness. And then I'm going to do it one more time, and then what you're going to see is that another glider emerges. So Gen 3 is then drawn on the left. I'm going to spam it with a bunch of purple things. Looking for the purple 3s, give me that. Looking for orange 2s and 3s are going to give me that one, and that one, which are those and those. Here you can see that we die due to overcrowding in the middle, and we're going to die due to loneliness up on the top left, and we're going to end up with 5 things at the end. What's cool about the glider is that at the very beginning, we started with 5 things that were alive. In that transition from Gen 0 to Gen 1, you can see that 2 things were born and 3 things maintained, or they persisted. That's true at every single step in this glider. Going from 1 to 2, you saw that 2 things were born, 3 things persisted. Going from 2 to 3, 2 things were born, 3 things persisted. And going from 3 to 4, we're going to have 2 things that are born, 3 things that are going to persist. What you can also see is that down here at Gen 4, we're basically back to where we were in the beginning, except for we've been clicked over 1 and down 1. So we've reconstructed another glider. So we have this cool little glider is then going to kick out that cool little glider. Well, if you'd go 4 more clicks into the future, you'd get another glider that's then moved over 1 and down 1. So if you go back to that cool little tribute, we had that glider that floated off to the top right. What that was doing was going up 1 and to the right 1. So it was positioned a little bit different. So here you can see that this one is pointed in that direction, which is going to say that we're going to fly down into that way. So as we get into the codes and kind of start playing around with some of them, we'll see a variety of other gliders and some cool things that do emerge. This is the really small glider. There are much larger, cool kind of starships that are going to kind of march along this thing. And they get super duper involved and are super duper cool. So we're not going to draw them by hand because they are a pain to keep track of all of these little nuances, but they're pretty cool to see in action as kind of marching across this screen being all super duper chaotic. At the end of this, I do have kind of just a sketched out, if you wanted to just kind of do this step by step by step. You don't have to draw out all of these horrible 0s and 1s and things like that. You can kind of see the Gen 0. You could then go through and just keep track of what things would be born. You basically be like, okay, that one's going to be born, that one's going to be born. And then you can go and try to think about, okay, which things are going to persist? Like, okay, that one's going to persist because it has 3 neighbors. That one's going to persist because it has 2 neighbors. And that one will persist because it has 3 neighbors. And then you can quickly see that you can generate Gen 1 out of that. So if you want to see me kind of hand sketch that, it looks just like this. You don't have to obviously go through and draw all of these little numbers, but they do kind of nicely set the stage. That's going to be how we implement it. We're basically going to store this as this giant 2D array. These arrays are going to keep track of how many neighbors you happen to have, and then you're going to blip on and off depending on what that looks like. So it's a cool little game to do by hand. We're going to get a whole bunch of chaotic things that emerge out of it. And that's where we're going to jump into next. Is we'll jump into some code so we can actually see these things in action and then play around with them a little bit more.